Hey, it's Grady at Twin Creek Audio, back in the studio today with another mixing video. Today I'm going to mix a song called Crazy Kitten from the Completists Songs for Cats album. I apologize if you thought this was a video where a crazy kitten was going to be mixing a cake or on a mixing board, but unfortunately there is no cat or kitten in this video.
You shaking the whole cat tree?
So my apologies to all the cat lovers. But in the meantime, while we're being sad that there are no cats in the video this time, we'll go ahead and go over to the mixing console and see if we can do a nice analog mix of the song Crazy Kitten. So I'm back at the mixing console to print an analog mix of the Completists song Crazy Kitten from the Songs for Cats album. The Soundcraft Sapphire is the console I'm using today. I do also have a Soundtrax Topaz. I like that console too. I've just been using the Sapphire more, mainly because of the patch bay. But they're both good consoles. So let me play what I've got so far on this mix. And of course, I pull these up and do some of the preliminary work before I film the video, so that it's not just me bumbling around trying to get my bearings. But this is what the track sounds like so far.
Kitten comes in, climbing the curtains. Kitty falls down, chasing her tail. Kitty come up, meowing and a purring. Kitten just wants to be loved. Oh yeah. You crazy kitten.
Crazy Kitten. It already sounds pretty good. Let me go into the overall things that I'm doing, and then I'll get into what's on these individual channels as far as EQ and processing. So overall, on the whole mix, you're hearing the Louder Than Liftoff Royal Blue color modules, and I have the high frequency boost jumper on. So I'm actually getting a 4K shelf that's built into those color modules on this whole mix, which adds a nice sheen. And then of course the transformers in those also warm up the sound. I drive those color modules pretty hard sometimes, or I back off. In this particular case, I'm driving those color modules pretty hard and getting a really nice sound out of it. So that's part of the overall sound that you're hearing. There is no bus compression or anything, but I do have the HRK C2584 stereo color processor with those Royal Blues installed in that. So those are on the master inserts of the master bus. So that's what you're hearing there. The overall sound, the whole mix is going through the Louder Than Liftoff Royal Blue color modules in the HRK C2584 stereo color processor. I'm driving the inputs of those color modules and then backing off the outputs. So that's part of the overall sound you're hearing, is those color modules. And I have the high frequency boost, which is a jumper on those color modules. I have those on. So we've got a nice smooth 4K shelf EQ on both sides of the overall mix in this case. There's no bus compression or anything on it, just those color modules. That's all that I have on the master bus right now. And that's all I'm going to add, because I don't really have anything that I'm not already using that I could use for bus compression, and it doesn't really need bus compression anyway. Those color modules already do a little bit of kind of natural compression, and you definitely get some saturation and warmth, and you get that nice high shelf EQ built into those things. And that sounds great on this mix. Other overall things on the mix that you may notice, other things in the overall mix that you may have noticed during that first playback or you may not have, there's only on the organ during that section. I'm doing my Reamper UniVibe trick again. So I'm sending one of the aux sends from the console into the Phatronics Reamper. Then the Reamper is feeding a Dunlop UV1 UniVibe pedal, and then the output of that is feeding into a PreSonus MP20, the instrument input, to bring it back up to line level. Then the MP20's output comes up over on the Sapphire's patch bay. I have the output of that patched to a mult. So I have two identical copies of that UniVibe. And then that's patched into a stereo channel here. And I'm using the Sapphire's famous width control to boost the stereo image a little bit. So I've got that turned towards the huge side on the Sapphire stereo channel. So that's working really well. I've also got some reverb courtesy of the Yamaha Rev 500. It is a room ambient reverb. It's basically a really short pre-delay, I think 5 milliseconds. Yeah, 5 milliseconds of pre-delay, 1.4 seconds of reverb time. And that's on the organ. It's going to be on the guitar solo, which you haven't heard yet, and on the vocals. So rather than being confusing and bouncing back and forth, I'm going to go ahead and describe the EQ settings I have on things first, and then I'll come back and describe any of the outboard gear, which in this case I've already described the Send outboard gear, the UniVibe and the Rev 500. So we'll be talking about insert effects at that point, or at this point, since I've already explained the other stuff. So on the kick drum, I've got some low frequency shelf being added on this console. That's 80 Hertz. I'm actually removing some attack around 3K instead of boosting it. Actually, it looks like it's more like 4K. And I'm actually pulling out about 3 dB of high mids because this snare, or this kick drum rather, this kick drum just had too much attack. I'm also pulling out some low mids from the kick drum. On the snare drum, I'm boosting 7K just a little bit. That's really all I'm doing to the snare as far as EQ. On the toms, that's a stereo pair of toms actually. It's 3 toms that were close mic'd, but they're sent as a stereo pair to the console, and they're EQ'd basically the same, adding a little bit of 5K for some attack on the toms, and I'm pulling out a little low mids. Then I have these 2 channels, which are an overhead mic. It's a mono overhead mic combined with a hi-hat mic. So that's pretty cool to have that going on. I like that. And it gets a really good sound. You know, you don't get as many phasing problems when you're using a mono overhead, and that's what we used in this case. Then we have a drum room mic here. The room mic's being EQ'd. I'm pulling out a lot of 12K with the high frequency shelf, boosting some lows with the low shelf EQ. I'm rolling out some more high mids and rolling out some low mids as well on this room mic. Then we have bass guitar. Bass guitar, I'm pulling out some 12K, boosting some 80, boosting some 700, and then I'm boosting some other low mids that, you know, a lot of these, they're not marked specifically, every single one of them, but I just use my ears. In fact, it kind of helps me to do that, is I do know what frequencies things usually are, and in the box I can see it. I can draw a curve or, you know, manipulate the EQ curves and all that. But then I find myself looking at the screen, and this way I'm actually hearing it. So I am boosting some low mids. Exactly what that is, I don't know. It's like 2 notches up from 10 Hertz. So it's probably just some more super low end like here. I just needed a little more of it. This pair of channels is an electric guitar. This is the main electric guitar that plays through most of the song, and it's barely being EQ'd. I'm removing a little bit of 3 kilohertz and a little bit of 12K up here. That's all that's going on with those. There's no other EQ on those. This is our organ, and I believe this was a Korg N7 keyboard that we used for this organ sound. And of course that's a pair of channels, so it's a stereo sound there. I'm EQing that a little bit, removing a little more, some high mids, but they're a lower frequency on the left than on the right. I don't know why I did that. Doesn't really matter. Just, you know, just use your ears on that kind of stuff. Removing a little low mid here from the left side, no low mid being removed from the right side, And these are, of course, being sent to the Reamper UniVibe setup that I have going. This channel is the guitar solo. I'm boosting some low mids there and pulling out some high mids and some highs with the 12K high shelf EQ. Way down here are our vocals. The lead vocal is this far right fader. I'm pulling out a little bit of high mids and boosting a little low mids on this lead vocal. This pair of channels here is our stereo background vocal, which isn't really stereo at all. This is the only thing I have in the box on this mix, is I'm using the Vacuumsound ADT plugin on this backing vocal track. That's why it's stemmed out here as a stereo pair for that ADT effect on those backing vocals. Just to keep it interesting, before I talk about the compression and compressors and things and other outboard gear I have on all these channels, I'm going to play you this section with the harmony vocals and that ADT plugin because it sounds pretty cool.
It's nap time. Kitten curls up, sleeps all day.
So there's our background vocals, and then we get into the guitar solo section. It sounds really cool. I love those backing vocals, and I love that ADT plugin. Really sounds nice here in the context of this particular mix. So what I'm going to do now is go over what compressors, because that's pretty much the only outboard gear left to talk about, is the compressors, and those are on the inserts of various things over here or down here. So let me talk about the compressors that I'm using on the drums, and then I'll play the drums back soloed up by themselves so you can hear that a little bit more clearly. So on the kick drum, I'm using one channel of the LA Audio 4x4 compressor. On the snare drum, I'm using the Symetrix 501 compressor. There is no compression on the toms, no compression on the overheads, and no compression on the room mic. So let me solo these drums up so you can hear the drums by themselves. I just have to find where that is. Okay, I found where that starts now. I decided to add a little bit of high mids and highs back into the overheads, but otherwise that sounds really good already. Those drums sound great. Now let's move on and talk about the bass guitar. The bass guitar, I'm using the Urei LA-10 compressor on this. The LA-10 is a fantastic sounding compressor. It really sounds great on anything and everything, but I love it on bass guitar. I also love it on kick drum, but I only have one of them. And on a moving bass line like this song has, this LA-10, it's about one of the best compressors for holding a bass in place without it being noticeably compressed or messed up by the compression. So the LA-10 on bass guitar right here, it's a fantastic compressor for bass. Also fantastic on kick drum. I've used it on vocals, all kinds of things, but in this case today it's on this bass guitar track and it sounds great. The electric guitars here and the guitar solo and the organ, they don't have any compression on them, so there's no additional outboard gear involved with these. The organ and the electric guitar solo are being sent to that room ambience reverb on the Yamaha Rev 500, so that's the reverb on these items here, the organ and the guitar solo. So the lead vocal, I'm using the ART TCS twin compressor system on this, with similar settings to the way that I compressed the vocal on the Homespun Centaur's Pharmacy single that I've done a couple of mixing videos on recently. So this is the ART twin compressor system, and it's in the OPL vocal, which is the optical compressor followed by the VCA compressor. and to me it just sounds fantastic on a vocal. So that's what's on the lead vocal. The background vocals are not being compressed, but they were compressed to tape with the RNC, as was the lead vocal when this was tracked originally. So you've got a little bit of compression on the way in that happened when this was recorded several years ago, and we're adding a little bit more just to bring it to the front of the mix and make it sound really, really good. And that Art TCS is doing a great job at that. That is an absolutely fantastic compressor. If you can pick one of those up used, since they don't make them anymore, I definitely recommend that one. I've done a couple of videos about the TCS, so check those out if you missed those. They're here on the channel. Let's hear what the room mic sounds like. Remember, there is no compression on this room mic, just quite a bit of EQ to sculpt the room sound to the way that I want it on this drum kit. So let's check that out. It's a good sounding room mic, even though I had to get a little extensive with the EQ, taking out some funky high mids and things. It was recorded in a big room back then. And the room mic, I think it was like 10 feet away from the front of the kit. So that's how I got that room sound, and it does add a nice ambience to the kit. Though I am using a little bit of the Yamaha, the room ambience reverb, I am sending the pair of toms. Those two channels are being sent to that Yamaha reverb as well. The snare is not, but there was some snare bleed in the tom mics on this, so you're getting a little bit of that Yamaha room ambient reverb on the snare drum as well. But it sounds really good, and it actually helps to blend everything together, so I'm liking that really well in the mix so far. Now I'm going to play what the bass guitar sounds like by itself with the EQ curve that I described and the Urei LA-10 compressor. So the bass guitar sounds really good. It sounds even better in the overall mix, but it sounds pretty good by itself. I've got a little bit of that 700 Hertz boosted that gives it a little bit of edginess so that it punches through the mix a little bit better. And you notice that a lot more when it's soloed by itself, but in the overall mix, it's blending in really well, and it's just making it where you can hear the notes of the bass a little bit more easily in the overall mix. Now this is a good kind of song to mix. This is really open. There's not just a ton of instruments. There's not a whole bunch of heavy distorted guitars or anything that's clouding up the low mids. So this style of a song is really a joy to mix because you have all the openness and you can really hear the character of the different equipment and compressors and things that you're using to give this a nice professional sheen. I'm going to play through the bridge section with the harmony vocals, and then that leads into the guitar solo. I'm going to play that, but I'm only going to play the guitars and the organ. So this is just the instruments with the guitar solo. This is no bass or drums, and none of the harmony vocals that would normally be here either. This is just so you can hear the guitars and the organ and how they're blending together through this section of the song. Okay, this is super fun and the mix is starting to sound really good. So let me play you the bridge section of the song where the background vocals come in, and then the guitar solo section, because it's kind of my favorite part of the song for some reason. Not just because I'm a guitar player, don't think that. I'm not like that. I like all instruments.
It's all day. Grady keeps guard, looking out the window, dreaming all.
This is a shorter song than some of the ones I've mixed on the channel, which I thought would be really good for this video because it's, not as long, so maybe people don't get as bored and don't watch the whole video because I work really hard on these and then nobody watches but like the first 3 minutes, and that makes me sad. But that's okay, I don't really care, I just do this stuff anyway, and a lot of you do watch the entire video, and I really appreciate that. I really have fun doing this video, so I'm glad that people are entertained or educated or, whatever. I try to make my videos at least slightly informational and at least slightly entertaining. I don't know if two slightlys add up to anything good, but let's hope so. So I'm pretty happy with this, and I think I'm ready to go ahead and print this. So check it out. I'm gonna go ahead and do this mix now, I think. Yeah, I am. I'm gonna go ahead and mix it now.
Kitten comes in, climbing the curtains. Kitty falls down, chasing her tail. Kitty come up, meowing and a purring. Kitten just wants to be loved. Oh yeah. You crazy kitten. Whoa. Kitten runs over, pouncing and a jumping. Kitty had fun running all around. Oh yeah. Oh, you crazy kitten. Whoa. Kitten getting sleepy. Maybe it's nap time. Kitten curls up, sleeps all day. Kitty keeps guard, looking out the window, dreaming all about chasing the birds. Kitty come up, meowing and a purring. Kittens just want to be loved.
So now is the part when I talk about the outboard gear and the settings that I used. I'm going to start from the top. That's the reverb that I used, was the Yamaha Rev 500. I used the room ambience preset, and I didn't even tweak anything. 5 milliseconds of pre-delay, 1.4 seconds of reverb time. I hope you can see that in the video. For some reason the screen on that and the camera don't get along sometimes, but that's the settings, and it's the user preset number 20, room ambience, on the Rev 500. The Urei LA-10 had that on bass guitar, and you could see during the mix what the gain reduction meter was actually doing, but we had about a 2.5 to 1 ratio on that. Release is right in the center, attack is 1 mark to the left of center. The detector circuit is about half a mark towards the peak side over here. The 501, I had that on the snare drum, a slower attack than usual and a slower release, and 2.2 to 1 ratio for that one. The LA Audio 4x4, this side of it was on the kick drum, and I do have this filter engaged, same settings as I used in the last couple of mixing videos, a low filter at 50 and the high at about, that's a little above 4K here. And the attack, I actually have that a little bit faster than usual because this kick drum track had way too much attack. Release almost right in the center. Ratio is about 5 to 1. On the lead vocal, I used this side of the Art TCS. I started with the V3 Voicing OPL vocal preset. And as you can see, I've tweaked the attack to be a little faster. Release is right in the middle, 3 to 1 ratio. And I just adjusted the threshold of this to taste. And actually I do have the tube circuit on. It just sounded good this time. So in the months since I've started doing mostly all analog mixing, using less and less plugins in the box and using more console EQs and outboard gear, I've noticed that things seem to sound more the way that I would want them to sound, or the way that I would expect to hear on a record, than what I could get in the box. Now there are a lot of good plugins out there, a lot of them that I really like, but compressors in particular, plugin versions don't do it for me as much as the hardware versions, and what I have are middle of the road or inexpensive hardware compressors, and they sound fantastic. On a bass guitar track in the box, sometimes I would have 4 plugins for EQ and 2 or 3 different compressors or limiters to get the bass to sit in the mix like I want. Now in the analog world, I use one rack compressor, usually either the Urei LA-10 or sometimes I'll use the Symetrix CL100 on bass guitar, and it just pins it in the mix and puts it right where I want, and it sounds like I want it to sound without all that fuss. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but I will say a lot of plugins really do sound good. One of my favorite compressor plugins is the Slate FG116, the blue stripe vintage version. That actually sounds pretty good. There are a lot of them. I find a lot of DBX plugins. I used to use the old Sonitis DBX 165 preset, and that sounds pretty good. So some of them approximate the real thing a little better than others, but I've really been enjoying mixing analog through a nice console like the Soundcraft Sapphire or the Soundtrax Topaz and using all this analog outboard gear. For me, it's easier, faster way to get the sound that I hear in my head. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video mixing Crazy Kitten from the Completists Songs for Cats. Don't forget to check the links in the video description. Among those links you'll find the link to the Completists Songs for Cats album that has this song on it. So check those out, as well as liking this video and subscribing to the Twin Creek Audio YouTube channel. I hope that you all have an excellent and wonderful day, night, evening, weekend, weekday, hour, minute, second, nanosecond, whatever it is you're having. Have a good one, and thanks so much for watching.
Climbing the curtains, kitty falls down, chasing her tail. Kitty come up, meowing.